We are going to pick up now on some of the themes that Annie and Ollie just talked about within that video. So what we'll specifically be talking about really is our new approach then to measuring creative effectiveness. So where we're then moving beyond actually really focusing on those short-term outcomes and actually really looking to that long-term impact that our creativity generates. And we'll be specifically then looking at the role of data agents in both informing that creativity, but also then providing the framework with which we then use to measure it. So as Annie mentioned, we are a creative agency, and of course, as an industry, we are obsessed with this idea of creative effectiveness because we need to make sure that our work works. That is something at McCann that we take very seriously, and we are proud of the fact that both the industry and our clients recognize that about us. But it's a challenge. We know that it's particularly hard at the moment. We're working in increasingly fragmented markets. Brand trust is at an all-time low. And so actually, therefore, what that really requires is having a laser focus on the outcomes that we want to achieve, having both the insights then and the creative capability to generate the work, but also then a really kind of robust measurement framework as well to deliver it. And so that's really then the challenge that we have embraced. And we've done that then in two different ways. So first of all, we have developed a measurement framework, which again is really designed to help measure that long-term brand impact that our creativity is generating. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, what we're calling the Brand Endurance Index. But at the heart of that as well is then Causal AI. Again, that's what's helping really inform those outcomes that we want to achieve. It's making sure that our teams across the business have access to those insights, and that therefore is really what enables our creativity as an agency. And that's what Tiger's then going to talk about. So I already touched on this a little, but when we talk about creative effectiveness, what we're not talking about exclusively is just this idea of what is that short-term sales uplift that we get from a single campaign. Instead, we really are having a look at that long-term brand impact that we're creating, which is that kind of amalgamation of all of the work and all of the creativity that we're putting out into the world. And so the way then that we really talk about this, McCann, is through this idea of building enduring brands. So it's where our brands have the power to win today, but it's also then where they have this ability to navigate changes in consumers, categories, market contexts, everything to be able to remain relevant and still have that power then to keep on winning into tomorrow. And we know that that matters when we actually build brands that are specifically engineered to focus on those long-term gains. We know that it builds commercial returns. So whether that is those enduring brands having a 2 times higher market cap, generating twice the consumer demand, or being able to command a 40% price premium, again, we really know that there are those commercial returns that are enabled by focusing on that longer term impact of our creativity. But it actually also expands beyond that as well. We've also had a look at it through the lens of an EVP, so employee value proposition, where we've seen that those enduring brands even have a 4 times more highly engaged workforce. So again, really justifying then that approach that we have in focusing on the long term. And when we do that, we really focus on 3 different dimensions, which is our framework both for then measuring creative effectiveness, but also then the different building blocks that we can use to help inform the way that we actually achieve that creativity. And that is then through this idea of commanding the category, connecting with communities, and charting culture. So when we talk about commanding the category, it's where a brand really understands consumer needs, it ties itself to them, uses creativity then in service of actually building brand distinctiveness and noticeability, and creates this sense of forward momentum for the brand within the category. When we talk about connecting with communities, it's where a brand really actually understands the consumers that it's seeking to talk to, uses that to build up a sense of emotional connection and a unity amongst its user base, and drives lasting anticipation. And for charting culture, I think for brands to truly kind of drive culture is actually quite a difficult challenge and often unrealistic. I think actually what brands are better able to do is really to ride the waves of culture. And so that could be, for example, a brand actually pushing more into something really kind of altruistic and purpose-driven, but it doesn't need to be. It can also just be where a brand is tying itself to a lot more fun, kind of irreverent popular culture moments or trends, and uses all of that again in the service of actually really starting to shape the category trends. And so we use those three different building blocks within a quantitative survey powered by Causal AI to really help do two things. First of all, as I mentioned, actually really start to measure the impact of the creativity. So it's our tool so that we can measure that long-term creative effectiveness. But we can also then use it to help start to fuel our ideas as well. So we do that again through Causal AI, but also then through actually having really kind of open exploratory questions within our survey, which begin to ask consumers who they are, what's important to them, expanding to category questions like the role the category plays, the benefit it provides to their lives, the trends that are shaping it. And all of that then is really what enables us to help both fuel creativity, but also then measure it as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Hayden. So in terms of tackling these challenges then, as Hayden mentioned, we had this really rich survey data set that captured hundreds of dimensions of how customers thought about brands, reacted to brands, and the way they valued them. So from this, we identified kind of two key challenges. So as Annie mentioned, that we wanted evidence behind these kind of conclusions, behind how we'd communicate with the brands we worked with. So one of those parts was, how do we actually build a model in the first place? So this is the kind of Causal AI versus traditional ML part, where due to the way customers think about brands and communicate in a survey, there's a lot of highly correlated variables that all kind of confound each other. So what we wanted to be able to do was identify, well, actually, what are the key drivers? How do we disentangle all of these effects and identify the actual impacts? And then the main part is then, okay, let's say we've solved that problem. Well, actually, we need to be able to do it at scale. There's no point in being able to do it once, because we need to be able to do it repeatably for every brand in every market multiple times a year. So that was the kind of key challenge here. So the way we really tackle this is through automation and using agents to run this pipeline and to clean the data and allow the McCann team to do this as often as they want, effectively, across geographies and everything. So as an example here, we're showing one of the data preparation agents that we have here. So the survey data was pretty messy, pretty varied. So depending on the market, there's a lot of very flexible questions with a lot of huge amount of dimensions being captured, which made it challenging. And this varied, from month to month. It varied from market to market. So we didn't have an exact data definition that was always the same. So we needed something a bit more flexible that would allow us to be able to do this analysis in a quick, repeatable way without having to hard code everything. So here we have an example of our data preparation agent that could take in this survey data and transform it, clean it, do the validation, the testing, etc., and converse with the data scientist to, raise any issues or flagging things, etc., that might have come up that might have varied from previous times. So what this does, it allows you to really quickly go from the kind of raw, direct survey data to prepared data for the pipeline. And this massively speeds up the time. As we saw in Darka's talk, the huge amount of the time was this original data prep. The next part then was actually embedding this and grounding this in our causal pipeline as well. So beyond just the data preparation, we also wanted to do the modeling, do the analysis, etc. So as I mentioned, we don't have to have it be a very technical user. So just giving a clean data set isn't enough. So we grounded that in causality, in our modeling pipeline, etc. And the first time we did this was quite manual. So as Hayden was mentioning, and Annie was mentioning, it's a difficult process. It is challenging. So we did it in a manual way the first time, and we used all the domain expertise that Hayden has, and we worked with that in an iterative way. But as we were doing this, we were bearing in mind that this isn't a one-off research project. We're going to be doing this again and again. So we took those learnings, we took that pipeline, and embedded an agent that had the knowledge and the context of that, which was then able to adaptively do this over and over again in the changing circumstances and the changing data. So that's what we're showing here. So that really allowed us to do this analysis at scale. So now we could do it for as many markets as we want, as often as we want, for every client, not just the most expensive ones. The next thing then is that for this to be valuable, it actually be in the hands of the people who make the decisions. There's no point in doing all this work if people can't actually use those insights. And even if they want to use those insights, you want to be able to use them in the best way. So a lot of the time what that might mean is, okay, we might have high-level insights, for, say, the entirety of the US, but a particular strategist might be working with one brand, and they care about maybe a specific demographic that they've seen they're lagging behind in sales. So in this case, you might typically go to the data science team and ask, oh, I need this specific analysis and another breakdown. And what this does is when you have hundreds of strategists like McCann does, it just inundates the data science team with all these requests. So effectively you're bogged down. We've seen it from the previous talks around this kind of backlog of requests and things like that. So what we wanted to do is be able to kind of centralize these insights so that the strategists could come and kind of get these types of questions answered that they wanted when they wanted them, without having to wait and kind of put things into a backlog. And we wanted to be able to, scale this to effectively any number of things and scale this to non-technical users. So again, what we did then was we took another data science agent, really in the consumption layer. So allowing this, again, grounded in the model. So the data scientists use our agents to build the model, build the data, and then we take a further consumption agent and ground that and allow the strategist now to converse with this and talk with this in natural language and ask questions in a way that maybe a data scientist wouldn't, and maybe the model doesn't know, but by grounding it in that context, it's able to infer what the intent is and actually kind of do these more ad hoc analysis, but do these in a way that's repeatable and reproducible because it's all grounded in the model the data scientist has built. So what this looks like here, for example, we can see an example of a strategist can come in, they can ask a specific question about a specific brand. So maybe they care that, this specific brand is lagging behind in the US market. Why is that? So we might see, for example, that actually customers are observing that relative to its peers, it's falling behind in community. Okay, that's one sort of insight, and that might be an easy high-level thing, but now you want to dig into that. Okay, it's not just enough to tell my customer that they're lagging behind in community. Why is that? What are the actual drivers of that? So we might see, well, actually, customers perceive them as like less novel in their creative marketing compared to their peers and things like that. So that might be one sort of insight. And that's the why and the attribution. But we also want to be able to actually make decisions based on that. So the next layer then, as we're seeing here, is around running scenarios as well. So we want to be able to say, okay, well, actually, traditionally, we know that the creative work we've done with them is focused on something like value. What if we were to say change the perception from value to something more like quality or reliability and things like that? How would that impact? So through this model and through this understanding, where with the survey we've effectively built a model of the customer, we allow the strategist to easily run these scenarios in the language that they're familiar with, and then go back and talk to their customer quickly without having to kind of go through this whole data science process. So that was hopefully what we've enabled with the team, and we've been in the early kind of testing of that and exposure of that, and hopefully we're seeing value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are able to do this so much more quickly now for our clients and across a much broader range of clients. Even very recently, we had a challenge from a client that we were able then to actually diagnose what the issues were, what the growth opportunities were, and basically have that brief, do all of this process, and actually then be in the US from the UK a week later with a full kind of presentation that actually outlined what the challenge was and the way that they could solve it. So it really is actually then enabling that speedy process and again democratizing those access to the insights. But I guess there's really kind of two different ways then that we have been and will continue to anticipate to use this into the future. And again, we've really built them around the two concepts of actually how do we measure and demonstrate that impact versus actually how do we fuel the creativity that generates that impact. So we've used it in multiple different ways. So for example, understanding which of our different marketing activities are going to have the biggest impact on sales. Really starting to get a deep understanding of the consumer and what their needs and motivations are that we can start to address in order to achieve those outcomes that we're striving for. What the different brand associations are and attributes that could actually then start to deliver against that. And who are our high impact audiences that we can actually reach in order then to be able to have those desired outcomes and impacts that we're striving for. And we use it then to fuel our creativity as well. So we can really start to actually funnel down in terms of understanding what's the broad conceptual territory we should be going down to, all the way down to the very specific messaging. So for example, we can understand, okay, for my brand, we need to identify what is the right strategy or strategic territory that we should be going after, which is the most fertile territory that we can go for. What's then the right concept within that of all the different ways that we can actually bring that to life? And then actually, what's that specific message, that one really pointy way that we can talk to our consumers about this overall conceptual territory? And again, run limitless scenarios about what that can do amongst our different audiences, amongst our different regions as well. And really then, as I said, doing that amongst our different audiences, so being able to identify what that impact will be and those different sources of growth. So that really is how we're using it now, by really being able to both identify both the sources of creativity, but then also being able to measure the impact that we have, and doing that in a really much quicker way that is providing that broad democratized access to these insights. That's it.